I want to start with a bit of a story about Seattle. So Seattle in the late 1970s was a failing town. Parallels were made with Detroit. The lumber industry was foundering. The manufacturing industries were bleeding jobs, and there was actually someone who put up a billboard in town famously that said, "Would the last person to leave Seattle please turn out the lights?" And in 1979, two entrepreneurs moved their 13-person company to Seattle. They were Seattle natives, and those people were Bill Gates and Paul Allen. Those two guys, Steve Ballmer and a few other guys, now created a company with 40,000 employees based in Seattle, a lot more around the world. They've created about 120,000 additional service jobs, and they've created an additional 80,000 jobs just in Seattle for college-educated people. In '94, Jeff Bezos, who had an idea for an online bookstore, decided to move to Seattle. And he decided to move to Seattle, his company, of a similar number of people to Seattle, because there were lots of engineers there, potentially ones he could take off Microsoft. So Amazon.com has 51,000 employees, 17,000 of which are in Seattle, and has created another 100,000 jobs in that town. So certainly in the world that I sort of find myself in, Seattle is not famous for its coffees and its grunge music, but more so for these tech titans that it has created. Now in 2005, we were sort of expanding at TradeMe just sort of across the way here, and decided that we wanted to add some people to our board, some smart people. And I'd always sort of thought that I'd like the work that Rod Drew was doing from the times that he was back at Glazier. And so in 2005, Rod joined the board at TradeMe, and then shortly after that we had the sale of the TradeMe business, and Rod started Xero, and that business IPO'd in 2007. Those two businesses now have, I think TradeMe has 350 people or so, based mostly in Wellington. We've got 750 people or so at Xero across the road. There are a whole bunch of startups that have come out of that. Reputedly, out of Microsoft alone, there have been 4,000 or 40,000, I'm trying to remember. It's probably more likely to be 4,000 startups have come out of Microsoft. So you sort of see these ecosystem effects, Silicon Valley being a well-known one, and Seattle another example. So I was in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago with a Xero board meeting, and there's a guy frantically, guy who works for Xero, frantically at the table saying, I've just done this deal. And I said, well, what's the deal? And he said, I can't tell you. I said, what do you mean you can't tell me? So he couldn't tell me until the next day because it was embargoed. But that deal was the sale of a business called Green Button to Microsoft. And that business was partly funded by the original shareholders in TradeMe, who did well out of that and started a venture fund. Came out of Peter Jackson's Weta Studios, and that was a business that was started off the back of the spare computing capacity that existed at Weta in between movies, right? So you've kind of got these interesting sort of integration of stories between what happened in Seattle, the building of Microsoft, these things that have happened in Wellington, and the sale of this Green Button business to Microsoft. And I think it's kind of interesting to think about how these sort of things come about. Bill Gates and Paul Allen didn't move to Seattle for tax breaks or any of those reasons. They moved there because that was home and they thought they could hire some of their mates and they knew some sort of talented people. So this sort of serendipity that exists around that, I think, is something which Wellington has also had a little bit of a taste of in recent years. I'm just going to go to my notes a little bit, which is also doubling as a sorry card from my daughter. So if we look at what TradeMe and Xero are doing now, I sort of think about it as looking at the next level of which is kind of my primary exposure to this most relevant exposure, is looking at the next level of talent. So to give you an idea, we just at Xero appointed 2 new people to the board. 3 new people to the board. One of them is Chris Liddell. Chris was the CFO at Microsoft. Chris was also the CFO at General Motors and did the biggest IPO in American history. We also appointed a guy called Bill Veit. Bill runs the enterprise at HP. His personal responsibility, his P&L is $28 billion US. And you sort of run into these people and you sort of look at you sort of think you know some talented people, and then you sort of meet the next level and you kind of go, that's actually the new benchmark for talent. So I think the conversation around talent and sort of knowing it when you see it is an interesting one, an interesting conversation that Paul started, that Wendy is trying to get some tractability around things that we can practically do to get the spin-off effects of Peter Jackson's and James Cameron's coming down as a result of Peter Jackson's. The most important thing is talent. Talent really likes cities. So if Wellington can become a node alongside a San Francisco or a Portland or a Sydney or a Melbourne, and these are all the places where I sort of accumulate my frequent flyer miles, and because you're following where the businesses are and where the talent is, and sort of where you end up. I think that's the first step. The second thing is to think about how we can get a conveyor of these ideas and capital between them, and those things come largely out of sort of talented individuals. And when you're looking to fund companies, quite often what I'm looking for is, can the person who you're funding blag the next level of money out of the next guy? Because the ability to attract talent and the ability to attract capital are key components to success in the business. So if you can attract the level of talent that Rod's managed to do in Xero, if you can attract the level of capital that Rod's managed to do in Xero, then you have a real chance of significant success. And I think the third thing is that these small things really matter in terms of where people start their businesses and the talent that you bring in. So we spend a lot of our time now thinking about bringing talent into New Zealand. Trying to get them here on a good day is sometimes a challenge. The biggest impediment we have is actually being able to happily move their families to Wellington or to New Zealand more broadly. But I think those small things really matter. If when you go to hire someone, of hiring talent at the right level and being aspirational with that, and bringing them back to New Zealand, those things can have massive flow-on effects in terms of the talent that you hire. You hire the head of small enterprise from Google to come and live in New Zealand. You just hire Xero, the head of the US PayPal small business unit, to run our US subsidiary. So if you aim for the right level of talent, that can have huge flow-on effects. And lastly, I'd just like to thank Wendy for continuing the conversation that Paul Callahan started. He sort of famously said that New Zealand is going to make its way in the world by doing weird things, creating these odd little niche businesses doing all sorts of different things, not necessarily a mega industry. And I think that analogue applies equally through to how we should be looking at talent. It's not necessarily a pyramid of people rated 1 through 10 with lots of ones and fewer numbers of tens. It's really more a log distribution where you find these extraordinarily talented people that can bring other talented people in and allows us to level up. So that's my intro. Thank you for coming.